we have to think about how the marketplace is changing, right? So over the years, we've seen the FDA, CDRH, which is the division that handles medical devices. They've done a fantastic job of working directly with the medical device industry. They also have a real push right now for consumer engagement and what they call patient engagement into that process, so that they make sure that the end user is involved in that process. So the FDA has also improved their response times. So they become much more responsive to the industry, right? What we're seeing happen over in Europe is that the CE mark, right? So their regulatory environment is changing. So in the past, it used to be, we have lots of research investment here in the US. You want to become a company, it's going to take you way too long to get approved through the FDA in the US. So instead, we're going to go over to Europe, run our clinical trials, get a CE mark, be able to get into humans, get it into the clinic, and then I'm going to take that data, come back to the US, and then I'll be able to get through the FDA. That's how it used to be. That is now starting to change, and we're starting to see it happen with companies, because starting this year, the regulatory environment in Europe is changing. So they've changed the regulatory environment. They've become much more restrictive, and they're requiring much more to be able to get that CE mark. And that is coming. Some of it is here now, but it's coming even more. So you're starting to see companies change their strategy. They're not running over to Europe to get the CE mark. Now they're starting to actually stay in the US, or they're going to Canada, or they're going to another country and running their initial trials and then coming back to the US. So things are really dynamic right now, and they're really changing in terms of the regulatory space. Reimbursement is a whole other story.
Sure. Wow, yeah. Yeah, that definitely, I think America's, or US is the best for that, right? Like highest profits, something like this.
Well, one of the things we have to think about, and this is one of the hurdles that we have in the neurotech space, is that, and particularly in the US, is that we don't do our economic studies. We don't do them well here. And it's one of those pieces of the pie that we need to do much better. In Europe, because they have a different healthcare system, you see those economic studies, making the case for a device as to why economically it's better than another treatment that's on the market today. They're doing that because the governments still they're paying for reimbursement. So they want to see their return on investment if we invest into this device, because we need to pay for it as well. So those economic studies almost came with the clinical trials over in Europe. In the US, we always lacked that. We had it as two separate processes. One process of going through regulatory approval, one process of going through reimbursement. Now you're starting to see that the companies and the industry is now putting value on these economic studies, and because they have to be able to get reimbursement from our third-party payers here. Because you can't run a company if you don't have cash flow, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. You don't need an MBA to figure that one out, right? So, but what is key? What is key is that we're starting to see these economic studies now starting to take place here, and we're also starting to see the FDA and CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, starting to work together to try to streamline that process so it doesn't become a hurdle here in the United States.
Wow, this is fascinating. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody about this, so I don't know.
We're all focused on the technology,
exactly,
which is really a cool thing, and I mean, and that's part of the consumer engagement movement, right? So part of it was written into the 21st Centuries Act that recently passed, is to really push towards some consumer engagement, particularly here in the United States. And what does that mean, right? So what that means is we've operated so long in the neurotech space that we've got this really cool device, and now we're going to go put it on the market. Or where can I take this really cool technology to go solve a problem? And instead of, I have a problem I'm trying to solve, and let's create the technology for it, right? So we're trying to turn that on the head. So really the consumer engagement movement is really saying, listen, we need to go out to these end users, the patient population, these consumers, and really understand what their medical needs are and what their daily needs are. Because if we just go to the clinical community, those physicians, albeit are very involved in the process, they only see that consumer for a short period of time. they don't have that lived experience, right? So how do we create a method or a mechanism so that those of us in the technology space can really understand what those needs are and help to build products and devices that are patient-centric? But then to go one step further, how do we create a framework so that once we build a technology, how do we validate that we're solving that solution? And then how do we build a framework so that as that product goes through the life cycle of getting it onto the market, that we have the end user, the consumer involved in that process so that we make sure that we're meeting those needs. So we're just starting that process. They're further along in the pharmaceutical industry. We're still at the early stages in the medical device industry. So you're seeing organizations like PCORI, which is the Patient-Centric Outcome Research Institute, right? We're starting to see MDIC, the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, really looking at a public-private partnership between regulatory and industry to be able to help understand this consumer process, right? So we're still at the early stages of this. I think actually Europe is a little bit further along in this movement. There's an area that's called UPATI, which is the European Academy for Training, Patient Academy Training Institute or something like that. But they're focused on how do we really engage the consumer, how do we train them on what the process is, and how do we get them engaged so that they're interacting with industry, they're interacting with regulatory, and they're interacting with reimbursement so that they're a piece of the puzzle as they move through that product life cycle.